My name is Samantha, and if I'm being completely honest, I've always been something of a backup in our family, like those old batteries that you find lying around in a drawer in the kitchen. Maybe they'll come in handy someday, maybe not. My sister Jessica was 4 years older, and from the moment I was born, she seemed to be the only heroine of this family play, the dazzling star around whom attention, admiration, and endless parental hopes revolved. And this was not hyperbole, not an exaggeration, this was my reality, imbued with a sense of secondary importance and a quiet childish desire to at least sometimes be noticed. I really did get everything that Jessica got tired of or that lost its novelty for her. It became an unspoken tradition, a family rule that no one spoke about out loud, but which everyone followed unswervingly. I remember when I was 7 and Jessica was 11. On her birthday she was given a shiny new iPhone, straight out of the box, with a film on the screen, with that same branded box that smelled of something unattainable. And when my birthday came 6 months later, I was solemnly handed her old flip phone as a gift, with a crack running across the screen, and one of the buttons stubbornly stuck every time I tried to dial a number, and my parents smiled then, as if they had given me a royal gift, with such an air as if I should jump for joy. But I didn't jump, I smiled. Because this is exactly what I had already begun to learn, to smile when it hurts. The same thing happened with clothes. Jessica went shopping with her mother to the mall, returned home with colorful bags filled with fashionable things, jeans, sweaters, shoes, everything brand new, with labels, with the aroma of new fabrics. And a year later, when she decided that fashion had changed or she had simply outgrown this style, all these clothes would migrate to my closet. And it didn't matter that my jeans fit like they were on a hanger, and the sleeves of my sweaters hung below my fingers, they were still okay, according to my mother. In middle school, I already wore all this without complaint, worn out, stretched out, not for my age and not for me, and I had to pretend that I was okay with it. Otherwise, a conversation would begin about ingratitude and how difficult it is to raise children in general, and birthdays. That was something special. Jessica celebrated them in a big way, with different themes, sometimes princesses, sometimes pool parties, with balloons, arches, rented entertainers, and, of course, catering, which smelled throughout the entire block. She always had a lot of guests, fun until late at night, music played by a guest DJ, and I had, like, 3 friends, a pizza from the cheapest place I could find that no one else seemed to order, and a supermarket cake that was already a little dry around the edges. Sometimes I imagined that this was all a mistake, and that everything was about to change. But with each passing year, the message became clearer. Jessica was a project, Jessica was an investment, and I was just someone along for the ride. When I was 14, Jessica left for college. Her parents drove her to a private school so far away that they had to cross 3 states. They cried in the parking lot outside the campus, hugged her like they were sending her off to the army, and then were silent the whole way back, as if mourning a loss. And I, sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, not daring to say it out loud, hoping that maybe now, finally, I would be noticed. Maybe now that the house was empty, I would become someone important. But I was deeply mistaken. Even when she was not around, she remained the center of their attention, like the sun that continues to illuminate even those corners from which it has left. They called her every day, sometimes even twice. I often heard her voice coming from the speakerphone in the kitchen, and how my parents poured out endless questions. So how are you, Jess? How is your roommate? What did you have for breakfast today? These conversations lasted for hours, and every other Saturday they left again, hundreds of miles away, to another world, to her, and I stayed home. With my books, silence, and the same flip phone, which now did not charge at all without dancing with a tambourine. They'd come back beaming, proud-eyed, with stories of her new friends, how her teachers adored her, how smart she was, how she was a leader, the life of the party. Mom would lay out photos like tarot cards, Jessica at the fall formal, at the pool party, at the library, smiling like she belonged on a cover, and I'd sit across from her, awkwardly fiddling with a teaspoon and trying not to ask questions I didn't want to hear the answers to. And the money god, it was crazy. They sent her money all the time, for books, for lunches with friends, for spring break, for anything. Sure, honey, I'll wire $500 right now, Mom would say into the phone, as if she were talking about 5. I'd sit in my room and think, I've never seen $500 at once in my life, except in movies. Meanwhile, My sneakers were so worn out that my toes were already showing through the hole, and when I stuttered about a new pair, I was met with an icy look and a monologue about how I didn't know how to appreciate things and wasted money on trifles. When I turned 16, I realized, enough of waiting to be noticed, enough of hoping that love and care would fall from the sky. I went and got a job in a small grocery store on the corner, the one that always smelled of bread and plastic containers. After school, I put on an apron, packed groceries, put cans on the shelves. It wasn't prestigious, it wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had the feeling that I could do something myself, that I had the right to something of my own, my money, my decisions, my new sneakers, finally, and I didn't need to ask anyone for permission. I didn't need to wait for someone to throw me crumbs. I worked nonstop all through my junior and senior years of school, sometimes forgetting what it was like to just come home and do nothing, because every penny I saved was a step closer to the freedom I had dreamed of since childhood, to a life where I would not have to be the eternal shadow of my own sister, too. The moment when I could finally live not on scraps, but on my own, albeit modest, but real, while my peers spent their evenings carefree at parties, wandered for hours around the mall or chatted in cafes, I stood behind the cash register, put products away, restocked the shelves, sometimes late at night, when the store was almost empty and only the old radio droned on about the weather for tomorrow. But this did not upset me. Now I had a goal, I knew what I wanted, to go to college and go all the way myself, without pity, without help, with the dignity that I myself had to earn. 2 years later, when I was almost done with high school, Jessica came home from graduation, and as luck would have it, her return coincided with the moment that was supposed to be the beginning of my journey, my story. The house was filled again with her voice, her things, her perfume, and endless conversations about Jessica's future, her impressive accomplishments, as if I, with my efforts, my subtle but persistent struggle, was still in the background, a shadow in the corner of a photograph. I worked on college applications in the evenings, at night, even during short lunch breaks, when I would hide in the back room of the grocery store with my laptop on my lap and a stack of applications in front of me. No one offered me help, no advice, no support, no interest. Mom and Dad were too busy preparing the house for Jessica's return, as if she were not a graduate but a national heroine. I was the one scouring college websites, double-checking deadlines, filling out endless forms, and even paying all the application fees myself, dollar by dollar, saving from every paycheck, denying myself even new socks. Then one day, envelopes started appearing in the mailbox. I remember sitting on my bed, opening them one by one, and something warm and shining flaring in my chest. I'd been accepted to 5 colleges, 5. I hadn't just passed, I'd been chosen. It felt miraculous, like life had finally nodded back. All this work was worth it. The best option was the closest, a public college in our state. Not elite, but solid, with a good reputation and a program I really liked. They offered me a partial scholarship covering 70% of the cost of tuition. Of course, it wasn't the full grant, and the remaining 30% was still expensive, but there was a glimmer of hope inside. Maybe, just maybe, my parents would help me, the same way they once paid for Jessica's every semester, every book, every vacation trip. I decided to tell them over dinner, hoping it would be a special moment. Jessica was already at the table, beaming as always, telling them about her new internship, which she had found with ease right after graduation. My parents were listening to her as if they were listening to a sage. Mom nodded and laughed, Dad cracked jokes, as if they were teenagers again and everything had returned to normal. I waited patiently for the conversation to die down a little, for the excitement about how great Jessica is to subside, and, catching a short pause, I said quietly but firmly, I have good news. They turned to me, slightly surprised. I got accepted to community college. They offered me a partial scholarship. It covers 70% of the cost of tuition. I said this, trying to sound confident, not like a girl waiting for praise, but like a young woman who had achieved something on her own, without anyone's help. I expected them to at least smile, maybe give me a hug, say, we're proud of you, Samantha, because this was the result of all my sleepless nights, all my sacrifices. But instead, my father snorted, leaned back in his chair, and shook his head. College? You don't need college, Samantha, you need to get a real job and start making money. I froze, and my mother laughed, not out of affection, but really, hoarsely, as if she'd heard a good joke. Honey, you're not cut out for college, you're too worldly, you're better off doing things with your hands. Well, you've always been like that, practical. I felt my insides tighten, as if someone had grabbed my heart and wrung it out like a rag. What do you mean I'm not cut out? I got accepted, I got a scholarship, I did it myself, and then, like a scene from a badly written play, Jessica intervened. She rolled her eyes, smirked, and said with that false amusement that sounds worse than any scream, "Oh, please, you've never been, well, not the smartest, you just don't have the brains to handle school, you'll flunk out in 6 months, if not sooner." She laughed, like she was saying something harmless, like it was just a friendly joke, but in that moment, her words hurt me the most, not even because she said them, but because Mom and Dad didn't say anything back, because they didn't argue, because they just sat and said nothing. I was used to being ignored, to having my achievements pale in comparison to Jessica, to always have to settle for her scraps, things, attention, love, but now, everything was different. This wasn't just being ignored, this was a death sentence. They looked at me as if they really believed it all, that I was stupid, that I didn't deserve the chance they'd once so easily given Jessica, and I shut up, because there was no point in arguing with that, because I already understood it. I sat at the table until the very end of dinner without saying a word. Jessica continued to prattle on about her new life, about how she'd gotten a call from a company offering to try herself in marketing, about how she was going to rent an apartment in the city, and my parents hung on her every word, nodding along, asking how they could help. No one brought up my college again, not one of them asked, "Have you decided on a major yet?" Or, "How are you feeling?" Or even, "Where do you want to live?" I no longer existed as someone whose life mattered. That night, lying on my bed in a dim room lit only by the dim light from the window where the occasional car sped down the night street, I stared at the ceiling and felt something crystallize inside me, a decision made not on emotion but from the inside, mature and hard as steel. I was going to college. Whether they believed in me or not, whether they supported me or turned their backs on me, it didn't matter anymore. I would find a way to pay for it. Even if it meant working triple shifts, taking out student loans, skimping on every sip of coffee, I would do it. I just couldn't let them take away from me again what might be my last chance to change my destiny. I wasn't going to let them decide my life the way they had once decided that I was different, incapable, not Jessica. After that gut-wrenching dinner, I threw myself into my work like my very existence depended on it, and to a certain extent it did. I took every shift available at the grocery store, sometimes working until closing time and coming home exhausted, and on the weekends I found work cleaning office buildings downtown. Every morning I started by wiping shoe prints off tile floors, cleaning toilets, and throwing out trash bags full of other people's lives. It was hard, yes, but every dollar I put in an envelope marked college brought me closer to my goal, and there was a certain pride in that. I finally knew why I woke up in the morning and why I stayed up late. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home was the same. My parents were acting as if nothing had happened, as if that dinner conversation had never happened, as if I hadn't told them I'd been accepted and that I had a scholarship. They had returned to their usual routine of daily care for Jessica, who was now living with them again. Chilling at home under the guise of an internship, she would wake up around noon, leave dirty cups in the sink, complain about being unbearably tired from having to send a few emails, and in return would receive consolation, kind looks, and offers of help. Sometimes I would come home from work, sweating and with an aching back, and she would be lying on the couch scrolling through her phone, and I would want to scream, "Can't you see the difference? Can't you see which of us is really trying?" I worked almost 60 hours a week and continued to save every penny, even though the math was cruel and unforgiving. Even with a scholarship that covered most of my tuition, there were still about $8,000 left to find, for books, for food, for transportation, for the most basic living. Sometimes thoughts flashed through my mind that I couldn't handle it, that this was just another struggle doomed to failure. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered that night at the table. My mother's cold laugh and Jessica's condescending tone, and it lit a new spark in me. I wouldn't let them be right. I would find a way. The summer passed in a blur, a mixture of fatigue, sweat, and constant mental arithmetic. I barely saw the streets except the ones that led me from one job to the next, and so, 2 weeks before classes started, as I was eating my usual quick breakfast in the kitchen before my morning shift, a cup of cheap coffee in my hand and a backpack over my shoulder, my Mother walked into the room, playing with a strand of hair and smiling as if she was going to invite me for a walk. "Samantha, we need to talk," she said, sitting down at the table across from me, and on her face there was that fake, forced smile that she usually put on when she was about to say something unpleasant under the guise of concern. "Jessica needs more space. She wants to turn your room into a walk-in closet. You realize how many clothes she has from college." I dropped the spoon into the cup, as if the sound of it was an echo of my internal shock. "But I start college in 2 weeks, I was going to live here and commute to classes. It's the only way I can afford to go to school," I said, almost losing my breath from surprise. My mother shrugged, as if this were a temporary whim. "Well, maybe this is a sign that college isn't for you," she said with an air of cosmic wisdom. "You could just get a full-time job, why torture yourself?" I felt the anger rising in my throat, like a wave that had nowhere to go. "I'm not dropping out," I said stiffly, barely containing my trembling. "Then you'll have to figure it out yourself. Jessica needs this room, and frankly, it would be easier for all of us if you moved out. You're hardly home anyway." Her voice was calm, almost caring, as if she were offering me a cup of tea rather than throwing me out on the street for a closet for other people's dresses. It was all I could do not to scream, to smash that cup against the wall. After everything I had been through, after all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the pain, these people were now literally throwing me out of the house so that Jessica could hang her blouses beautifully. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Panic was rising in my throat, but I remembered that I had a goal, I had a will, I had something that Jessica didn't have, the strength that came from rejection. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I hid in the back of the store, took out my phone, and called Maya, my only real friend since high school, the one who knew my family's ins and outs, the one who didn't need any explanations. "I need a place to stay, right now. Do you have anyone? Or have you heard anything?" My voice was shaking, even though I tried to sound calm. "Actually, yes," she answered after a short pause. "I'm living with 2 girls now, Sarah and Kim. It's a tiny apartment, of course, and the area is SOSO, but I think we can squeeze in a 4th. But the rent will go down for everyone. Come over after your shift and have a look." The apartment, to put it mildly, was neither comfortable nor safe. An old apartment building with peeling plaster, paper-thin walls through which you could hear someone swearing on the floor below, a ceiling with damp spots, a kitchen where one burner worked every other time and the sink leaked. But none of that mattered. It was a roof over my head, it was a chance, and most importantly, these were people with whom I felt not in the shadows, but at home. Maya and her neighbors were truly kind. That weekend, while everyone else was enjoying the last warm days before fall, I stood in my room, surrounded by the boxes and trash bags I'd packed with everything I owned, and every balled-up sweater, every old notebook, every pair of worn-out jeans felt like more than just things, like fragments of a past I was leaving behind forever. I wasn't crying, no, there was just emptiness and exhaustion inside, mixed with stubbornness. My parents weren't home, they were at Jessica's, as usual, supporting her at her internship, as if she were the one moving to a new world, as if she was the one standing there with a box in her hands, not knowing what would happen tomorrow. I didn't have to say goodbye, and there was a bitter irony in that. I left a short note on the kitchen table with my new address, just in case they ever wanted to know where I was, but even then I knew there would be no call, and it didn't. The life I dreamed of when I entered college turned out to be nothing like the one they painted in the brochures with smiling students. It was exhausting, painful, and sometimes it felt like I was slowly falling apart, layer by layer. I probably slept 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I worked the morning shift at the grocery store, then ran to class, trying not to fall asleep right on my desk, and in the evening, cleaning offices, until the very night, when the city froze, and I did not trudge home through empty streets, with an aching back and shaking hands. And if it were not for the girls in that small shabby apartment, which smelled of old books, cheap coffee, and something familiar, I probably would not have lasted. Maya, my eternal rock, was studying to be a teacher, Sarah was studying to be a nurse, and Kim was studying business, and we all had one thing in common: we knew what it was like to not have enough money for the bus, to have ramen for dinner, and to have every penny a choice between breakfast and a textbook. We were like a family, held together not by blood but by helping each other. If someone didn't have money for food, we shared. If someone fell asleep at the table with a book in their hands, they covered them with a blanket. we didn't discuss it out loud, we didn't pretend to be generous, we just did what felt natural. But even with that support, I was barely keeping afloat. I was living on the edge of survival, eating cheap noodles and whatever I could grab for free on campus, wearing clothes that were falling apart at the seams because I couldn't afford new ones, and walking to college every day because I didn't have gas for my junky car. I bought used textbooks at garage sales or begged upperclassmen for them, and if I couldn't find the book I wanted, I'd spend hours photocopying pages from the library, a few sheets at a time, to avoid paying extra. It was all at the limit, but I didn't give up, and yet, nothing could have prepared me for the one nasty encounter that happened about a year into my studies. I was walking downtown, fresh off my morning shift, tired, sweaty-backed, wearing a faded t-shirt, my hair pulled back into a messy bun, my face drawn from lack of sleep. I just wanted to get to the library and finish my essay, but as I rounded the corner of the street, I literally ran into them, my entire family, emerging from a fancy restaurant, dressed up, beaming, laughing. I froze, watching as they paused for a second, their faces taking on an unmistakable expression: shock, disgust, and judgment. "Oh, my God." Jessica spoke first, her perfect lips pursed into a grimace. "You look terrible, thank you," I said, trying to walk past her without making eye contact, but she didn't shut up. "No, seriously," I added, starting to laugh, "you look homeless. What, do you live on the streets?" My father looked me up and down as if I were a piece of mud stuck to his shoe. "This is what bad decisions do, Samantha," he said, bored, as if explaining something banal, and Mom added, shaking her head, "You sound like a beggar. This is embarrassing." Jessica was still giggling. "If I had any extra money, I'd give it to you. Seriously, you could really use it." Those words hit harder than any slap, not because they were in my face, but because these were my family, the people whose approval I'd once wanted to earn, whose warmth I'd waited for so long to receive, and now they were standing in front of me like a stranger, talking like I was some random stranger they'd throw change to for charity. I felt my throat tighten, my fingers tremble, and something inside me break. They walked away without looking back, still making jokes and comments, while I stood alone, in the crowd, on the sidewalk, my face wet with tears that I couldn't stop. People looked at me, some with sympathy, some with surprise, but I didn't care. I was humiliated, I was furious. And it was on that night, when I came home, sat on my bed and stared at the wall, that I made a promise to myself, so strong that it felt like it was burned into my heart. I would do it, I would finish college, I would get a good job, I would build my life from scratch, and one day they would all see who the real losers were. I wouldn't take revenge, no, I would just live better than they could ever imagine. I would become what they had never dared to dream of, and then, maybe then, they would realize what they had lost. From that moment on, I tripled my efforts. I studied longer, worked more, pushed boundaries that had previously seemed insurmountable. My grades were already good, but I improved them. I no longer waited for help, no longer dreamed that someone would notice my efforts. I made myself, and no one, not words, not looks, not pain, could stop me anymore. I started volunteering not because I had free time or because I wanted to decorate my resume, but because I knew it would give me a chance to get extra points, maybe recommendations, and most importantly, connections that I desperately lacked. I chose those projects where I could be useful and at the same time get to know people. I helped with administrative work on campus, sometimes recorded lectures for students with disabilities, took on the organization of events, although by this time I often could not feel my legs after a shift. Gradually, without making a fuss, I began to build relationships with my teachers, not out of groveling. No, I just worked honestly, asked questions, turned in on time, and stayed after classes to figure out what I had missed. They saw that I wasn't looking for the easy way out, and they respected that. Those 3 years flew by faster than I expected. They were simultaneously excruciatingly difficult and incredibly fulfilling, as if I hadn't been living that entire time, but racing through life without allowing myself to stop for even a second. I kept my head down, didn't strive for popularity or recognition, just worked tirelessly, clenched my teeth, and somehow, despite everything, graduated with honors. I remember the day we, the graduates, lined up to walk across the stage, and I looked ahead into the hall, among the endless faces, searching for familiar features, although I knew that they would not be there. My parents were not there, and Jessica was not there either. Instead, Maya's parents came, and after the ceremony they hugged me so tightly as if I were their own daughter, and I simply pressed them against them and whispered, "Thank you," because I could not say anything else, and honestly, that was enough for me, maybe even more than I could have expected. My professors, especially Dr. Martinez, my mentor and business professor, noticed my dedication, my work ethic, and my consistent grades. After one lecture, she invited me into her office, which smelled of coffee and leather-bound books, and said, "You are exactly what employers want, Samantha, hardworking, reliable, smart, don't let anyone, not even yourself, think otherwise." Those words stuck with me as much as my diploma. Thanks to her, I got interviews at several companies, and by my last semester, I had received offers from 3 companies. It was more than I could have ever imagined. I chose a marketing position at a mid-size company, with an office in the city center, and when I signed the contract, I almost cried. The salary was higher than I had ever earned, and the benefits, including health insurance and paid time off, seemed like a dream after all those years of living on noodles and being afraid of getting sick. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe deeply. I moved out of that cramped, drafty apartment with a leaky ceiling and into a clean, tidy one-bedroom with real walls, a real bathroom, and a real bed, not an inflatable one, not one abandoned by someone, but one I bought with my own money. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, and I felt a victory in every detail. Now I could buy groceries without counting every coin, without checking prices against the last dollar in my wallet. I could afford fragrant strawberries, Real bread, and decent coffee. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just existing, but living. I gave my all at work. I took on any project, stayed late, brought fresh ideas, helped colleagues, and never complained. My boss, Jennifer, noticed it right away. A year later, after several successful campaigns, she promoted me to senior marketer with a hefty raise, and it was like a gong that I was going where I needed to go. The money started coming in steadily, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't spending every penny. I was putting almost half my paycheck into a savings account. I had a new goal, not just to continue living frugally, but to save up for a house. And not just any old barn, but a real, beautiful, warm house that would scream to the world, "Look, I did it. I came from poverty, from pain, from the shadows, and I built this with my own hands." The only one of my family who occasionally called was my Aunt Carol. She hadn't been particularly close to us as children, but over the years she became that faint but constant voice reminding me that somewhere in the past I had a family. We talked every few months. She asked how things were, how work was, how my health was. Sometimes she talked about her family. I never asked about my parents or Jessica, not out of spite, but because I had decided long ago, their world was no longer mine. But Carol still talked. "Your sister got married last year," she said one day, and I smirked at the ceiling. "Some guy from my internship, big wedding, country club, she's great," I replied flatly, without putting an ounce of sincerity into my words. "They live with your parents now. Her husband lost his job. There's not enough money. Jessica complains to everyone at every family gathering." I said nothing. What could I say? Part of me wanted to ask, maybe out of malicious curiosity, but then I reminded myself, their problems are not my problems anymore. Carol continued, "They had a baby girl, and she's pregnant again. 2 kids, and they're still living with your parents." And then I felt something strange, almost sorry. But then I remembered that evening, her laughter, her words, her face full of disdain, and the pity disappeared. "What do they say about me?" I asked suddenly, although I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answer. "They tell people you live in the slums somewhere," Carol answered calmly. "Your mother says you look terrible when anyone asks her, and Jessica likes to add that your life probably went downhill after college." I couldn't help but laugh, loudly, bitterly, but no longer painfully. "Do they know I graduated from college?" I asked, feeling a wave of strange calm rise up inside me. "I don't think so," Carol answered. "They've never asked about you directly." The job continued to bring satisfaction and, importantly, the stability I had longed for in the days when my existence was reduced to endless shifts, grueling mornings, lack of sleep, and frozen fingers that could barely hold a pen during lectures. I got another promotion, this time to marketing manager, and it wasn't just another job change. It was a symbol of recognition for all my efforts. All those years of gritting my teeth and moving forward, not knowing when or how it would end. The Promotion came with a tangible increase in salary, and I finally started earning the kind of money I'd dreamed of when I was eating noodles from a plastic cup in the evenings, sitting on an air mattress in an apartment with mold on the ceiling. Now I could afford to think about the future not as a distant, abstract dream, but as something real, visible, accessible. I started looking at houses in earnest, studying neighborhoods, monitoring classified sites, writing down parameters, figuring out what I could count on. I didn't want a mansion with columns or a "look how rich I got" house. No, I wanted something that would say to the world, "I made it, I did it myself." Not flashy, but dignified, something cozy, well kept, with character, a place where you could finally let go of everything that was weighing you down inside and just be. When I turned 29, I celebrated it with dinner at a nice restaurant with Maya and a few colleagues from work, people with whom we had paved the way to each other through joint projects, sleepless presentations, and office jokes. I remember sitting at the table, looking at the beautiful dishes, at the glass of wine that no longer made me feel guilty for spending money, and thinking how strange and wonderful it was to order any dish without checking the price, as if I had finally crossed some invisible line between I can't and now I can. And a week later, I found that very house. It was in a great area, quiet, green, with cozy streets and neighbors who nodded to each other in the morning, modern, bright, spacious, with a large kitchen that I had dreamed of for so many years, and a backyard where I could already imagine myself sitting in the summer with a cup of tea, listening to the birds and feeling safe. The realtor immediately understood that I was not just looking. I was ready, I was determined, I knew what I wanted. We completed the paperwork quickly, and the day I signed the papers, I felt like I was flying off the ground. I had a home, mine, a real one, not a bed in someone else's corner, not a rented room with a schedule in the bathroom, but a home. The next weeks flew by in a whirlwind of boxes, sales, furniture deliveries, and endless measurements. I took my time, choosing with pleasure and love. Every single thing, from the curtains to the pillows, was new. Not a single hand-me-down bed, not a single chair given away. Everything was mine, everything was bought with my own money, chosen with my own hands. I looked at it and couldn't believe it. This wasn't just furniture. This was a life I'd built myself. I couldn't hold it in anymore. And called Carol to tell her. I couldn't hold it all in any longer. She listened, and I felt something in her voice that I hadn't heard from anyone close to me in so long, genuine joy for me. "You bought a house?" she asked, her voice shaking. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I replied, smiling through tears I hadn't expected. "I'm planning a housewarming party next month. I really want you to come." "Of course I will, you deserve it, Samantha, everything." I guess I knew she wouldn't be able to hold back, that news like this couldn't stay a secret in a family, even one this disorganized. But looking back, I'm not sure I wanted her to keep it quiet. I guess there was still a tiny, stubborn part of me that hoped, maybe, if only from afar, they would know that I'd made it, that I wasn't lost, that I hadn't broken. 2 weeks later, as I was unpacking the last of the boxes, arranging the books on the shelf, trying to figure out where exactly to hang the painting, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, no delivery, no friends, no neighbors, and so when I opened the door and my parents and Jessica were standing on the porch, I was simply stunned. I stared at them for a moment, unable to move. They looked older, more haggard. Then I remembered, Jessica was clearly pregnant again, her face tense, her movements cautious. Mom spoke first, as if we hadn't been apart for years. "Hi, Samantha," she said, as if we'd been discussing something in the kitchen just yesterday. I didn't invite them in, but that didn't stop them. They walked past as if my house was theirs, as if they had a right. I watched them look around, taking in every detail, every chair, every pillow on the couch. Their gazes slid over the new things, and I saw something like envy, tinged with surprise, appear in Jessica's eyes. "How could you afford all this?" she asked. "I work," I answered, trying to remain calm. "I have a good job." "This is a really beautiful place," Dad murmured, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "What are you doing here?" I asked, feeling my heart clench. "We heard you bought a house," Mom said. "We wanted to see it." "I didn't invite you." They laughed almost simultaneously. Dad shrugged. "We're family, we don't need invitations." I was about to answer, to say that a real family doesn't act like that, that they don't laugh when you're standing hungry on the sidewalk, that they don't throw you out for someone else's wardrobe. But I didn't have time. Mom looked around again and said with a slight nod, as if she were inspecting a furniture store. The house is certainly beautiful, Samantha, but it's not really your style, is it? More like Jessica's. I looked at Mom, trying to make sense of her words, which sounded like an awkward joke, like a prank gone wrong, an inappropriate anecdote told in the wrong place and at the wrong time. What do you mean, it's not right for you? I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, in my home, paid for with my tears, sleepless nights, dogged work and self-belief, and listened to my mother walk calmly, almost indifferently, around my living room, like a realtor on a preliminary inspection, glancing at the curtains, the walls, the sofa, not as my property, but as something she could calmly take away. Well, it's just really beautiful, she said with a light, barely noticeable sigh, and Jessica really needs a place like this. She's got 2 kids already, and a third one on the way. Maybe you should give her this house? I couldn't hold back, the laughter burst out loud, sharply, almost hysterically, and I clasped my hands over my chest and laughed out loud, from amazement, from anger, from how far their demands went. Are you crazy? I finally squeezed out, looking at her with an expression as if I were dealing with a stranger, but my mother didn't even blink. Think about it, my father intervened, lowering himself onto my new sofa, which I had spent months choosing and, for the first time in my life, had bought not at a second-hand store, but at a real furniture store. He sat down on it without invitation, as if he was at home. You got this house easily, and Jessica, she's married, she has children, she needs it more than you do. Easy. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. I remembered scrubbing office floors in the winter to buy used textbooks, manning the cash register in the summer while everyone else was on vacation, saving every penny, denying myself literally everything. Easy. I worked 2 jobs through college, I said slowly, as if trying to contain the storm inside, living in poverty, scraping together money over the years, and you're telling me it was easy? Jessica, meanwhile, stood a little distance away, examining the interior with that expression I remember from childhood, a mixture of feigned interest and genuine envy. It's not fair that you live in such a nice place, she muttered, while I'm crammed into a tiny room with Mom and Dad. I shrugged. Maybe you and Mark should think about renting? I suggested, knowing that common sense would not be listened to in this house. We can't afford that, she flared up. He works all the time, and with the kids, everything is on me. It's hard, it's not my problem, I answered calmly, although inside I was pulsing with anger. My mother came closer to me, as if she was about to reveal to me a great truth. This is your chance to come back to your family, Samantha. You could prove that you care. Do one thing, give this house to Jessica. It will show that you are still a part of us. Silently, I looked from her to my father, then to Jessica. In front of me stood the people who had thrown me out of the house without hesitation when I needed them most, who had mocked my attempts to build my own future, who had called me stupid, a pauper, worthless, and now they were standing in my house, the house I had suffered for, and demanding that I give it up. I need to make a call, I said, keeping my tone neutral, then we can continue our conversation. They all looked at each other and smiled, sure that I was really considering this, ready to agree to their absurd demands. I headed into the bedroom, closed the door behind me, and dialed 911. 911, how can we help you? A calm voice said. I need the police, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. There are people in my home who are demanding that I give them my property. Are they threatening you, ma'am? They refuse to leave when I ask, and they demand that I give them my home. It's my home. We'll send a patrol immediately. I thanked them and hung up, then I exhaled, fixed my hair, and walked back into the living room. Jessica was already loudly discussing how comfortable the master bedroom would be. It'll be perfect for Mark and me. Finally, each kid will have their own room, and the backyard is so great for playing, Mom added. I've always dreamed of having grandkids where they could run around in the grass. I'm glad you like it, I said, walking back into the room and sitting down in the chair. Dad nodded and sat back down on the couch, as if waiting for final approval. So you'll do it? Give Jessica the house? We'll wait and see, I answered evasively. Exactly 5 minutes later, there was an insistent knock on the door. I got up, opened it, and there stood 2 police officers. One of them spoke up. Ma'am, we've received a call about a property dispute. Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. I nodded. These people have invaded my home and are demanding that I give it to them. They claim we are related, but I don't know them. My parents' faces turned red. My father jumped up from the couch. We are her parents, he shouted, indignant. She is our daughter. And I am her sister, Jessica chimed in, dramatically clutching her stomach. I looked at the officers and said in the calmest voice I could, "This is the first time I have seen these people. They came to me, told me they deserved my home, and refused to leave. I feel threatened and I need your help." My mother babbled incoherently, "Samantha, what are you? We are your family." "Officers," I turned to them, "could you please remove these strangers from my property?" The officers looked at each other and studied our faces, apparently trying to figure out where the common sense was hiding in this absurd scene in which everyone claimed to be right, and the truth hung somewhere in the air, between the carpet I had chosen with love and the silence that had occupied my home before they arrived. Finally, one of the officers spoke, his voice calm but with an iron edge that brooked no argument. "Regardless of your relationship, ma'am, if you ask them to leave your property and they refuse, we need to intervene and insistently ask them to leave." Jessica immediately flared up, "This is insane. She is being completely unreasonable." Her voice trembled with rage and a wounded sense of entitlement. "You need to leave, now," the officer repeated, more firmly, and I watched my parents' confidence slowly dissipate, like a bubble deflating. They had no choice but to head for the door, and though their steps were slow and their glances over their shoulders were dark and sullen, they were gone. My mother turned around at the last moment, saying something she must have been thinking about for a long time. "You've completely cut yourself off from your family. Samantha, I hope you're happy." I didn't answer, I just watched them walk to the car, Jessica still loudly ranting at the injustice, my father pressing his palm to his forehead in frustration. When they were gone and the street was quiet again, I suddenly felt not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction, but complete, warm, deep relief, like an exhale after a long, held breath, like the dust had cleared from the windows and pure light was pouring through them. I stood in the middle of my living room, in a silence filled only with the echo of my own footsteps, and looked around, seeing not just furniture or walls, but the result of what I had built from ashes. This was my home, my life, my choice. For the first time in years, I felt truly free and strong. 2 weeks later, on a lazy morning and a particularly aromatic coffee, Carol called. Her voice had that recognizable tone of mocking irony with which she usually shared news. "Your parents tell everyone that you've gone crazy," she said. "They call you greedy, cold, unstable. I wonder what you think about that." I was silent for a second, and then I laughed, short and easy, as if I had heard an old joke that had lost its edge. "I think you finally stood up for yourself," Carol continued, and I could hear genuine pride in her voice. "Good for you. So, are you coming to my housewarming after all?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied. The housewarming was everything I'd dreamed it would be. The house was filled with voices and laughter, not reproaches and demands. Maya came with her boyfriend, my friends from work brought dishes, desserts, drinks. Carol showed up with a bottle of wine, clearly more expensive than I would ever buy for myself, and a hug, warm, real. We ate, drank, reminisced about the past, discussed the future, and, most importantly, rejoiced in each other, in the moment, in life. "To Samantha," Maya said, raising her glass, "for proving that hard work and determination can overcome anything." Their toasts were not routine, there was no envy or hints in them, only sincerity. There were people around me who believed in me when no one else did, people who loved me simply for being me. As the evening began to fade and the last guest said goodbye, I walked barefoot through the house, turning off the lights in each room. Each switch was like a new chapter that I opened for myself. I felt pride in every wall, in every pillow, in every item that I chose and bought with my own hands. This was not just a house, it was proof, it was a reminder to myself. I went through everything that they tried to heap on me, and not only survived, but built something real, strong, worthy. When I was getting ready to go to bed, the phone vibrated on the nightstand. The number was familiar, and I froze, if only for a second. It was my parents' number. I could have ignored it, I could have just deleted the call. But something in me wanted to know how this final act would end. I put the phone to my ear. "What?" I asked without emotion. Samantha, please, my mother's voice was different, quiet, pleading, can't we work this out? Family is supposed to stick together. I chuckled, you're right, family is supposed to stick together, I just wish I had it anymore. And I hung up. I blocked the number, then, without hesitation, Jessica's number, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a breakup, it felt like a release. The next morning, I woke up in my bed. In a quiet, light-filled room, the window was slightly open, and the smell of morning air was coming into the room, and birds were singing somewhere in the distance. I made coffee, poured it into my favorite mug, and went outside. I sat down on a wooden chair and pulled out a notebook to write down what I wanted to plant in the spring, what flowers, what herbs, maybe a few lavender bushes. I smiled, I was home. And I realized something important: we don't choose the family we're born into, but we can always choose the family we create, and sometimes the best choice is to leave and build something better, on our own.